Hi and welcome to ADHD Freedoms. I'm here today with Natalia who is co-founder of the Kairos Clinic in Boulder, Colorado. And she is a specialist in ADHD and OCD. Natalia, so can you tell us a little bit about what has driven you in the direction that you've gone and what you do?
Absolutely. Well, like many clinicians, I had a very personal journey in. I was seeking therapy myself for intrusive thoughts that I had right after my children were born. I thought I was a terrible person. I had thoughts of throwing them out the window, of doing harm to them. I had constant worries that something awful was going to happen. And I thought I was a bad person. So I went in to get therapy as a young mom, support and kind of making sure that I felt like a good enough mom. And through that process, I actually spent a decade misdiagnosed as having generalized anxiety disorder. And I was misdiagnosed in part, I think, because my ADHD caused my OCD to not really resemble the type of OCD that people are used to seeing. I think that my ADHD really delayed a diagnosis of OCD, and it also my OCD delayed the diagnosis of my ADHD. So I want to speak more to people who do have that dual diagnosis to understand how confusing of a terrain that is and how it can actually cause you not to get the help that you need either with your ADHD or with OCD.
Okay. So you've had quite a personal journey with this, but you're also a qualified professional. So you were a psychologist before you were diagnosed, or how did that come about? What was your kind of journey with that?
Yes, so I'm a clinical mental health therapist, an LPC here in the United States, and I was not diagnosed when I was a practicing therapist. In fact, it took my own child having OCD concurrent with ADHD for me to actually learn a little bit more about myself. And now that I run an OCD center, I actually realize how common that is for adults to realize their diagnoses once they see their children really struggling.
So with ADHD, how long have you known that you've had ADHD?
So the ADHD diagnosis actually came first, and that was about, I think, like about 6 or 7 years ago. I have pretty severe ADHD, a lot of distractibility, a lot of auditory processing issues, really, really big troubles with losing things, forgetting things, difficulty processing information in the same way through the same means that others do. However, I actually was compensating for that with my OCD. So when I finally realized that I truly have ADHD was when I was starting to build my own business, and I was realizing how difficult certain things like accounting, and managing my invoice were for me. And I was like, I am very smart. Other people seem to do this easily. What the heck is happening? And I went to a psychiatrist to kind of learn more about my brain. I was unsurprised to learn that I have ADHD, but you always, even as a practicing clinician, you always struggle to kind of see yourself as honestly and as clinically as you see others. So I went on ADHD medicine, which was a life changer for me. I'm so grateful for the medicine. It completely opened up my eyes to how hard my life had been, honestly, because it was so much easier once I had medication. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very grateful for it. Unfortunately, what the medication also did was it caused an incredible uptick in my OCD. And I started visibly compulsing in ways that I didn't used to. For my OCD, it had been a lot of intrusive thoughts, a lot of avoidance, a lot of control. However, the classic compulsions did not come out until after I was on ADHD medicine.
So, with regard to, there's a lot of people are not diagnosed with ADHD who have got ADHD. And there are also
Yes.
people being diagnosed with ADHD who don't have ADHD. So it can be quite confusing for people to know where they stand. So, for example, for myself, I think I have a lot of ADHD traits, very strong ADHD traits. I'm not diagnosed. Potentially, it would help if I get a diagnosis. So for someone like myself in that position, obviously it's different in America. I'm over in England, but what would you recommend to someone who's really struggling with day-to-day life? Would you recommend for them to go and get assessed and to actually get support for what they need?
Oh, 1000%. 1000%. There's a lot of self report questionnaires and other types of like ADHD assessments that don't require some like big expensive assessment. A lot of psychiatrists do it quickly, sometimes too quickly, overdiagnosing. So that's a problem here in the United States. I don't know about England, but I I personally, like, as an adult realizing that I have ADHD, like, I could not have really understood what was happening without being formally assessed by a psychiatrist. I needed that. I needed that perspective. I needed to have that conversation. And honestly, I needed to try stimulants and see how they worked on my brain to really appreciate what the ADHD is, because we've had this brain our whole lives. Like
Yeah.
it's not like having depression or some other late onset. Like, this neurodiversity is just the way we think. So how could we possibly see our diversity? We are our diversity. So I think it's so, so helpful to bring in another clinician, another perspective, even if you are a clinician yourself.
So you feel that diagnosis has obviously given you a lot more understanding and self-acceptance of it. And presumably that helps with OCD. Now, for the people listening, maybe you could explain a little bit about why OCD has got this comorbidity with ADHD. Now, from my perspective, I'm starting to think, well, actually, if you've got ADHD, it's going to make your life difficult. You're going to have more anxiety about life. Your life's going to be harder to control. And whilst OCD is kind of about control, ADHD is kind of a lack of control. So there's kind of a push-pull there, isn't there? So it kind of
Oh,
makes
yeah.
sense that they go together, really, that actually if you live in an ADHD lifestyle without having the support that you need to manage it and understand it, that it's going to manifest somewhere in an imbalance. And I'm guessing that's where the OCD comes in. You're saying that potentially 25% of people with ADHD may have OCD linked with it.
Yeah, so it's actually the opposite.
Okay.
So about 25% of people with OCD have
Ah,
concurrent ADHD.
okay.
I don't know what the stats are the other way around, so I should probably learn that. But you gave me $1 million question. Like, I would be super famous if I could answer it. Why is there such a concurrency of neurodiversity and OCD? We honestly don't know. There is some thought that it travels on the same gene. Both are genetic inheritable disorders. OCD, there's also the theory that, you espouse, which I think is quite valid, that sometimes OCD can be a compensatory behavior that sort of gets out of control. But we really don't know is the actual honest answer. We just know that there is a huge comorbidity. Some people believe that 25% is actually even low. And, like, just to be clear, it's also comorbidity with other forms of neurodiversity, including autism spectrum, giftedness, kind of any way that a brain can be exceptional and diverse. There is a higher tendency to also have OCD.
So for someone who maybe, presumably some people have OCD but don't actually recognize that it is OCD. Like you say, we've grown up with these brains and we're so used to who we are, we just accept that's what we are. But
Mhm.
to understand that actually you've got this thing going on and actually that isn't what most people have. So, I mean, OCD can manifest in different forms. You talked about intrusive thoughts.
Mhm.
What other ways may someone sort of start to recognize that they might be experiencing OCD type symptoms?
Yeah. It's a great question. I want to answer something or respond to
Okay.
something that you said earlier, in that the concept of not really knowing that you have OCD, because that's just been the way your brain is. I would actually say it's a little bit different than that. For those of us who have OCD, there's often an onset. It's very few of us that don't remember sort of a pre OCD time in our lives. So it's different from ADHD in that there is a little bit of a reference point there. So, especially with children, we can see often onset is at age 7, and then there's a big other onset around puberty. Those are the two times that you just really OCD symptoms are new to the child and to the family system. The other thing that can cause OCD onset is pandas, which is basically where there is an infection in the brainstem, that an inflammation that actually like causes late onset OCD. So these are all different ways that we can see OCD present, but I very distinctly remembered not having OCD.
Okay, very
And
nice.
that was, I really, that is a very clear memory of not worrying about controlling myself, controlling the situation. I really remember that sort of carefree energy that I had when I was just pure ADHD joy. So I do, feel some nostalgia for that little girl. But to answer your question about how OCD presents, it is such a vast array. There's no way to even capture all the different ways in this podcast, but I'll just say, to summarize, there's harm thoughts. So these are intrusive thoughts, not that we want to harm people, but we're afraid that we might. There's fear of contamination. So that's the good old fashioned, like germs on your hands, but actually, contamination can also be moral contamination. So somebody is around you that is amoral, and we're worried that we'll catch it. Contamination can also be like air contamination, or some place is seen as contaminated for a reason that has nothing to do with germs. It has to do with whatever your specific phobia is. So that's contamination. Then there's all of these categories around people pleasing and relational OCD, which is a lot about worrying about what people think of you, if someone's mad at you, if they're going to leave you. Compulsions can be like over apologizing, being overly anxious around like whether or not someone is the right fit for you or you're the right fit for them. There's also quite a bit of OCD that revolves around food. So, controlling food, basically worrying that there are certain foods that are bad foods, certain foods that might make us vomit, sort of fearing putting certain foods in our body. And then finally, a big category is health OCD. So people having a tremendous amount of anxiety that causes them, health anxiety, that causes them to like Google all their symptoms and go to the doctor too much, or on the other side, completely avoid the doctor. So those are just a few. It's like quite the range, which is very funny because, most lay people and honestly, most therapists just think of OCD as like tapping, checking door locks, and hand washing, which is just a small subsection of, people's OCD experience. And in fact, I've never had hand washing. Like I have had almost every other form of OCD, but that's literally not one that I've ever done. So, most clinicians, like the therapist that used to see me, will miss my diagnosis and they'll just say generalized anxiety disorder or adjustment disorder. It's hard to be a mom disorder. Like, they are not going to see that true level of suffering.
Hmm. So with OCD, I mean, you've talked about that there can be a physical reason for onset. Can it be like a traumatic event or life circumstances changing? I mean, is it possible that if you'd taken another route and your life was relaxed and everything was in control, the OCD would be lesser or not present at all?
It is possible. There are theories around trauma induced OCD, and my OCD onset actually came around a trauma. A very big trauma was kind of the unlocking force of my OCD. However, I do really believe that my OCD would have come online regardless, just based on the way that I see myself navigate this world. I don't believe that all of my OCD is rooted in that original trauma, and working through my original trauma, which I have, is not actually help to the OCD in any way. It was lovely for other reasons. There there's a lot of theories out there, but there is a very strong genetic component. So, just to give you a quick anecdote on the genetic component, um, my last name Aisa, it comes from Nayebi Ayiso, who's my great grandmother, who immigrated from the Middle East to Mexico when she was 13. She was already married, and she ended up creating this like incredible store in Cordoba, Mexico. And she made this amazing career for herself as like a turn of the century woman that actually didn't have a lot of like means or any education. In my family, the lore is that she had OCD. And so you'll hear all these stories in my family about how she was like adjusting things in the store, how controlling she was. All of these like clues that she actually got the success that she got because she like was it just tirelessly exacting
Hmm.
in her profession. And I kind of didn't think much of this until I realized I have a cousin that runs an OCD clinic in Mexico City. So I'm here, like in Colorado, running my own OCD clinic. It's a second cousin related to Nayebi Aisa. And there he is in Mexico City. Same diagnosis, same passion. We don't even know each other. Like the genetic component, they're studying it right now. It is huge.
Okay.
So I don't want to discount people that believe that there's, a trauma induced, expression of it. I do believe that, but I think that that trauma was unlocking what is definitely a genetic predisposition.
So OCD, I mean, there'll be people listening to this who are affected by it, and it can be a very crippling condition to be facing, can't
Mhm.
it? It can really control your life as you try and create control in your life. So what have you found that has actually helped you and helped your clients with OCD? Because I think that's the magic question. People want to know, well, firstly, if I cannot go to a therapist, because many people cannot access therapists, is there anything I can do? And if I can access
Mhm.
a therapist, then what is then? So I think, if we can look at those two angles would be great. I mean, just some immediate, how can I start a journey of understanding and, kind of healing myself in some way? How would that happen? Is there any advice you can give for that?
Oh, so much. There's so many different ways that you can go about it. So I'll start with the people that can't find a therapist. One, you can just email me, Natalia at kairoswellnesscollective.com. We'll put that in the comments. And I have a free virtual support group that runs every single Tuesday. If it gets too big, we run another one. It is incredibly important that free support groups be a resource that every OCD clinic provides because there should not be any monetary like barrier to receiving help. And we're lucky in the digital age, like this is coaching. We can do it across state and country lines. So I very much suggest looking into these free groups. There's also ones across the world.
Yeah.
So that's one resource. The second one is the IOCDF, the International OCD Federation. They have yearly conferences. The next one is in Chicago. They are pretty dang amazing because they are a combination of those of us with lived experience and those of us who are OCD practitioners, and we all get together and workshop and learn more about like cutting edge treatments. So many different avenues get explored, and honestly most OCD specialists have some personal connection to OCD. It's like hard to get that passionate about it if you don't. So a lot of us are learning while we're practicing. Another resource that I would strongly recommend is that the content online is getting better and better for OCD, thanks to the work of some tireless advocates, many of whom are working in conjunction with the IOCDF. There are many different pages that you can follow that really teach you everything that we know about OCD treatment. So mine is at letstalk.ocd on Instagram. It's one of many which I think have legitimately great content. For the people that can find a therapist or can afford or can have the time for a therapist, the treatment for OCD is actually incredibly effective, and it's something called exposure response prevention. You're not going to find another therapy in mental health that has such high effectiveness as exposure response prevention does for OCD. It's just such a dang shame that more therapists are not trained in ERP, because it can absolutely transform a person's life. So if it's helpful, I can give an example of how
Yes,
exposure response prevention. Yes?
that would be
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Okay. So can you give me a case? Could you imagine, Clive, what would be the phobia? What would be the thing that we're working on?
So we're talking about treating an adult, a child, or does it work the same across both?
It works the same across all.
Let's just say that we've got an adult who's having intrusive thoughts
Mhm.
about maybe hurting themselves or hurting others.
Perfect. Okay, that's a great one. On that subject, I would love it if everybody checked out Pure O, which is an indie film from here in the United States. Director Dylan Tucker. It fully represents this type of OCD, the harm OCD with intrusive thoughts. It shows the therapy very, very well. And shows what recovery looks like. So just a quick plug in for that film. But let's take our adult that has fear of harming others and himself. Uh, the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to break the taboo of expressing that fear. Right. So a lot of us with intrusive thoughts, I never told anybody that I was having thoughts of throwing my babies out the window. In fact, that took me the longest of everything to admit out loud because I identified with those thoughts. They're my thoughts. I was like, if I wasn't a bad person, why would I have them?
So getting
So,
over the shame and the fear is
yeah.
a really important part of the
Mhm.
process.
Yes. So actually talking to a therapist and being like, I have intrusive thoughts that I'm going to kill my family and kill myself. Actually, just saying those words is so cathartic because it feels like we can't say those things out loud. It feels like that will manifest them. And what we realize is that it doesn't, and that you're not alone in having these harm thoughts, not at all. And the therapist is going to help you understand that you are not your thoughts, that in fact, you are getting intrusive thoughts about harming someone because it is what you most fear. That is, having a fear of something is not the same as wanting it, and sometimes it's the opposite. So the first thing that I would do in exposure response prevention with this person would be figuring out what are they doing? What are the actions? What are the compulsions? What are the thoughts that they are doing when they have these intrusive thoughts come in? Like, are they doing a thought neutralization? Are they praying to try to ward off those thoughts? Are they checking to make sure that nothing bad did happen or that they didn't do something? Are they hiding their knives because they don't trust themselves around knives? And we figure out what are all of those actions, and then we bring all of that back. We bring it all into the therapy room. So, for example, if that person who's afraid of hurting others is not letting themselves use knives around loved ones, we actually do exposures to that person holding a knife, holding the knife up to my neck, holding the knife up to their neck. We do this in office together. And the reason why is that we are saying sort of, screw you, OCD, like,
I've
you
got
can't
control.
scare me. Like, yeah, like, get out of here with that bullshit, right? We're actually like really pushing back on the OCD in a way that is, bringing our power back, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and you'll see when someone is really afraid of harming themselves or me, you'll see their hand shaking, holding onto that knife, bringing it up to my neck. Like, they are so afraid. I'm not afraid. Like, I've done this a bunch of times. Like, and if I'm letting you have a knife up to my neck, it's because I know that you are an incredible human being that has literally the opposite of a murder streak, that you are like so aligned with human life that I know that I can trust you.
I really like what you said about it's not necessarily the force is not there because you want to do it. It's possibly there because it's the last thing that you want to do. And it actually does show
Mm-hmm.
that you're an incredibly caring, empathetic person in some respects.
Yes.
You know, the fact that you're so
Yes.
worried about it. And I think to normalize it again, the common thing that I think everyone has experienced is when you're on the edge of a tall building or a cliff and you think, oh, I could just jump. And that's
Mm-hmm.
there to save you. It's because it's saying, yes, you could imagine what's that like to do that. So you really want to be careful near the edge. But when it
Mm-hmm.
goes over that and it starts becoming compulsive and you don't understand that, then it's going to start controlling your life, I assume. And so the exposure therapy sounds very incredible. It sounds transformative. And I'm sure you've seen people in your therapy centers. It's transformed their lives very quickly.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, 1000%. And just to go back on something that you said around everyone has intrusive thoughts, that is true. The difference between a person without OCD and a person with OCD is that when we have an intrusive thought, we take it real seriously and get freaked out and do a bunch of things to make sure that that intrusive thought does not represent us or that we don't act on that intrusive thought. So that's where sort of the control component comes in. And if we go back to, the original concept of ADHD plus OCD, those of us with ADHD, we got a lot of noise thoughts. Like, we're driving around and we might get distracted. We might see a bicyclist and we might think, oh, I could hit that bicyclist with my car. Like, that's an intrusive thought. That is just like part of 1,000, like, stupid thoughts that go through my head, at least when I'm driving. However, a person with harm OCD is going to be like, oh, how could I think that? Oh my gosh, I must really want to. But what if I did hit them? They might, oh, sorry, they might sort of go back and check and make sure that they didn't actually hit that person. It's all sorts of behaviors can happen because we take our intrusive thoughts seriously.
So, with regard to kind of neuroplasticity, I mean, if there is, I mean, like the prefrontal lobes of our brain deal with these kind of pragmatic responses, and presumably that's not happening when you've got OCD happening at a high level. You're not rationalizing it. You're not able to step above it and to take a kind of helicopter
Yes.
view of it. So with
Yes.
practice is what I think you're saying is that actually you do learn another layer of thinking that can kind of cover the top of it and kind of safety wrap it a little bit.
Mhm. For sure. And, the best type of learning is experiential learning, for OCD at least, and definitely for ADHD brains. And so it's basically, we can't just think like, oh no, like that's an intrusive thought. I'm not going to hit a bicyclist. It's okay. We can't actually think away our thinking. We actually, what we do need to do is experience driving every single day without hitting anyone, and actually be able to input all that data and be like, well, it actually hasn't happened. But unfortunately, with OCD, what the number one compulsion is avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
So, you mentioned, Clive, about seeing huge transformations. Those clients are the ones that are basically shut ins. Their OCD has gotten so extreme that they won't drive, they won't go to the grocery store, they can't work, they can't like interact with friends, they can't date. Um, that is like sort of like the classic most extreme presentation of OCD. And those are the people that the exposure response prevention, it needs to get them back behind the wheel of a car and seeing that nothing bad is going to happen, having that experiential learning happen through, facing your fears.
So, with regard to that form of treatment, is it possible that someone who cannot access therapy, paid therapy, can access some of those resources and techniques through your free links and the kind of online support groups that you run?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the International OCD Federation is dedicated to expanding access. They even have scholarship programs to attend conferences. There's an online conference coming up. It is paid, but you can get a scholarship to go to that and learn all of the techniques that are free, free to all to learn and know. But what you really need though is like a coach, and that coach can be perhaps a loved one that isn't going to sort of enable the OCD, but it is a very, very hard thing to do alone. So I strongly suggest having a support network that is like understanding the OCD alongside you and is basically like really helping you execute. Because, if we talk about the ADHD as well, like there can be this sense of like, oh, that's overwhelming. I can't even attempt that. And I really want to encourage people um, to look at ways that you can take one step towards your fear. Today, just one step.
I think
Drive on a highway once, like do um eat out one time, go to the grocery store one time, find these like little wins that didn't used to be hard for you but OCD has taken away from you, and prove to yourself that you can do them.
I think that's great advice. I mean, when something looks too big to do, too big to tackle, it is the small wins that give you the motivation and the confidence to keep going. So actually
Mhm.
seeking them out, but again, seeking those things out can feel very tough and it can feel very,
Yes.
very, very anxiety producing. But
Mhm.
some of the biggest wins are behind that layer of anxiety, I'm guessing, that actually you
Yes.
cross that fear in a safe and supported manner. Like you say, if you can get the right support from friends and loved ones or from a therapist or support groups, like you say, there's a growing number of support groups. And what I would hope to do is to put some links in the show notes to your site. And I can also create a page of links on the ADHD Freedom site, and I'm happy to do that.
Mhm.
And what I think you're saying is that there is hope for people out there. And I think a lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
do feel very hopeless when they're trapped in this spiral of shame and worry and anxiety. And it can just feel so overwhelming that, like you say, they don't even speak about it There may be people very close to them in their lives that don't know what's going on in their internal world. So for those people, you would suggest that there is hope.
Oh my goodness, yes. The once we recognize, just like with ADHD, once we recognize that ADHD is what's been going on this whole time, it's like a weight being lifted. Same thing with OCD. Like both of those diagnoses, when I finally got them, at the ripe old age of like mid 30s, late 30s, I understood so much more of myself and I had so much more compassion for myself. And I was able to, in those moments, like access like actually great treatments. They're out there, like they work, especially with OCD. ADHD is kind of is less treatable in my humble opinion. The medicines work, executive functioning coaching can work, but in my opinion, ADHD is a lot about loving your brain, mostly for what it is and appreciating how incredible it is in the version that it is. But OCD, you can treat to the point of remission. OCD, while it is a genetic disorder and it will kind of be with you as a possibility throughout your life, you actually can get to the point where it no longer presents like hardship. You really can. I have not personally gotten to that point, I will admit. But I have had the great honor of shepherding hundreds of clients through from severe to remission. And that is like the most satisfying thing in the world as a therapist, to discharge clients and be like, you don't need me anymore. You got this. And it's a really, really incredible process to see. So I really encourage you to keep that hope alive. And if you have a therapist that you've been seeing for years and it's not working and they just tell you you're anxious, like change therapists. Like that person is not your person. If you think you have OCD and that's never been like brought into the therapy room, then change therapists. Like go with the specialist who can actually, assess that, because unfortunately in the mental health world, we don't get very much training on OCD. In fact, like I don't know about you, Clive, but in my training, it was like 2 slides. So like I had no hope myself of like going into this profession with like a great foundation in OCD.
Well, I am very impressed with your passion and dedication to helping people, and the fact that you advocate free support, I find really, really heartening, because a lot of people, as I say, cannot access. But what you're doing by coming on podcasts, running your Instagram group, running your online, you're giving hope to people who may not otherwise get any help at all. And whilst it's beneficial, obviously, if you can get a therapist who specializes, it should be that everyone tries to start somewhere. And it starts with hope, and it starts with actually asking for some help to the right people, I think, and being brave enough to go, actually, this is an issue, but not being so ashamed and overwhelmed by it that you cannot talk about it with the right people. And some people don't naturally have the right people around them, do they? And, to actually broaden your network out enough to get the right support. I mean, I've joined, I'm not diagnosed ADHD, but I've joined an ADHD support group, and I find that very helpful. And I join their online meetings, and they're very accepting that I'm not personally diagnosed. But by being there, I get to hear other people's experiences and what's worked for them. And I also get to share my experiences, which is helpful for me to consolidate the things. So, for example, I mean, if we move back to ADHD for a moment, I mean, just being able to go, right, I'm going to do that task now. I mean, I'm terrible for putting tasks off. And so now if I get that email coming, rather than thinking I'll do that tomorrow, I go, I'm doing it now. If I can do it in 2 minutes, I'm going to do it. And what I find from that is it's reducing my anxiety levels, and it reduces the amount of mental mess in my head. And it helps. And that's why I think, we can actively change bits of our lives that are going to make a difference. And it can start off really small. It can just be replying to that one email, or telling a trusted friend that you have intrusive thoughts maybe, and then seeking out the right help. So from this, we can provide some links that people can follow. I will write up this podcast as well into an article which I can share. And maybe we can do a follow-up at some point. Just if anyone's got any questions, they can leave them in the podcast comments. And any requests for further information or advice, I think we'd be happy to answer. So I thank you very much for joining me today. It's been really insightful hearing you speak on it. And I think there's a lot of people who will benefit from hearing what you've shared. So to close off, I mean, what's your advice to people if they're struggling with OCD at the moment? What's your kind of top few points that you would suggest?
Oh my goodness. It's hard to distill down, but I will say you are not your thoughts, and that anxiety is a nervous system state that is passing through you. You can face anxiety. Modern society, we're all about not having anxiety, but unfortunately with the treatment of OCD, we do have to experience, like you said, Clive, a certain amount of anxiety getting to the other side and realizing that we're still okay. So, do the thing, do the hard thing that your brain is telling you not to do, and you will prove to yourself that how strong you are, how capable you are.
It brings about great hope, I think, that small changes can make such a big difference in people's lives, and that by getting the right help and support, that can really start to happen. So thank you very much for joining us. And if you've been listening, then please check out the links and resources that we have on ADHDfreedoms.com.